Hello and welcome to today's Digital Dealer webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by C4 Analytics and it's titled, You're Doing It Wrong, the No BS Guide to Digital Domination. Today's webinar presenters are Candace Jordan, Agency Developer Manager at Google, and Sam Duncan, Senior Paid Search Analyst. The webinar will run approximately 1 hour. Please help me welcome Candace and Sam.
Hey everyone, thanks for attending this webinar on this holiday week. It's kind of strange, kind of have the 4th in the middle of the week, but just to get started here, I'd like to introduce myself. So my name is Sam Duncan, and I'm a Senior Paid Search Analyst at C4 Analytics, and I'm also the Paid Search Training Manager here, so I kind of wear a couple hats. And I'm privileged to present here with Candace, who can, of course, introduce herself.
Hi everyone, Candace Jordan. As the host said, I'm an Agency Development Manager at Google. All that means is premier partners, which are a small subset of Google partners like C4 Analytics, get a dedicated team, including myself, to work with them on having access to all of Google's plethora of data, new products and features, strategy, etc. Thank you for having me, Sam. I always love doing these webinars with C4 Analytics, and hopefully we all walk away with some really critical information on how to make our digital marketing campaigns even better.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Candace. So where we're going to start today is we're going to focus on 3 main points. So the reason that I kind of created this webinar and I really wanted to present it was because lately there's been a lot of interesting developments in online marketing. So I know that many of you are kind of constantly being bombarded by information about programmatic display and just general display advertising, different fancy products like geofencing, and then people start using words like long tail and searches and things like this, and it can sound very complicated. And so one of the things I'd really like to do here today is kind of break it down and kind of give you kind of the very basics, kind of just cut through all the BS, cut through all these types of fancy marketing speak, and just get down to the details of kind of the nitty-gritty requirements of every successful kind of advertising, online advertising, and general advertising really campaign. So, kind of want to start with kind of our kind of basic overview, right? So campaign customization and specificity. So this is what we're talking about here is, kind of creating marketing campaigns that are customized to your goals and are specific to your areas. So I want to kind of get away from kind of the cookie cutter campaigns where everyone just kind of does the same thing, and you have your agency or your marketing department just kind of doing kind of the same basic setup for your dealership as they do for many others. But really, when you want to be successful, you got to kind of break it down and be more specific and unique to your area. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to kind of focus on these 3 main metrics. So all advertising campaigns, especially in AdWords, kind of focus on these 3 main core concepts. So the first main concept is targeting. So that's just how you're going to reach your audience, right? So not only, the keywords and things like that, which people like to talk about, or geofencing or any of these types of things, but what about just the basics of just the geographic targeting? Right? Like where exactly are you going to target and why are you targeting there? So many of these campaigns I see, kind of these cookie cutter campaigns, that's what I call them. They just kind of target like a radius around your dealership. Oh, we'll just target 20 miles around a dealership. Well, that's all good and fine if that's where all your customers are, but you're going to want to step outside of that, right? There are times when you maybe want to step outside that 20-mile radius. Or maybe you want to entice some specific part of that radius to come to your dealership. And that's where you start to get into kind of the second point, which is messaging. So you need to be using language that not only, represents you, but also entices your customers to come in. So it's not enough to just say, hey, we have great deals on cars, but you need to tailor that message specifically to your audience so that you can get them to come in off wherever they were going to be off the internet and come to you directly. And then once they do that, once they decide they want to go with your dealership, then you need to move into kind of the medium, right? So what I mean by medium is you need to give them a way to contact you. So there's been some shifts in kind of buying behavior for consumers that have been occurring over the years. They're kind of generational shifts. And so, obviously there's a lot of talk right now about millennials, how millennials think, what millennials are. Who are millennials? For the record, full disclosure, I am technically a millennial. So
me too, Sam.
See, Candace and I were millennials. I'm on the older end of millennials. I put that in parentheses.
Me too.
Yeah. So together, we kind of, maybe we have kind of a longer view, but I've seen a lot of this talk about millennials, and it kind of comes up. And so we're going to focus on that just a little bit here as well. I don't want to get too far into kind of, research and marketing all about millennials. We could do a whole nother webinar about that, no problem. But it is kind of an important concept when you're talking about that medium, because oftentimes our advertising campaigns are really leaving out a portion of our future customers because we're making them jump through hoops to reach us, which is obviously not something that you want to do. So factor one here, so targeting. So this is kind of what I'm saying. It's not just about, a 20-mile radius around your dealership or a 50-mile radius around your dealership, but what you want to start doing is thinking about this a little bit more critically, kind of working with your marketing departments, or if you're in the marketing department, working with yourself, I guess, to really start focusing down these campaigns and really start trying to create customized messaging for different geographic areas. So it's true that, your customers in general, if they're looking for, a Honda Civic, for example, then they're just going to search for Honda Civic no matter where they are. But at the same time, by creating these highly targeted campaigns, you can actually start to customize your incentives, which is something that you can't easily do if you're just doing kind of big radii. So when you're targeting a location in AdWords, you're telling Google that you want to show to anyone in that location. I think everyone understands this. Not much confusion there. If you're targeting 20-mile radius around Boston as an example, then you are telling Google, I want to show to anyone within that 20-mile radius around Boston. But the second half of the statement, I think, creates a lot of confusion. And so it's something I really wanted to bring up here, which is that you are also telling Google, by default, you can change this technically, but rarely people do, that you also want to show to anyone who's interested in your product outside of that area that are searching for products in that area. So I'll give you an example because it seems kind of confusing. So if I'm targeting a 20-mile radius around Boston and someone is outside of that radius, so maybe they're 30 miles away, but they search for, new car in Boston, Google will actually show them ads targeted to Boston as if they were there, because Google is trying to do them a favor. It's saying you are interested in that area, so we're going to show you ads around that area. So this is usually a good thing, right? You want to show to people that are willing to travel. Maybe they're living just outside of Boston, but they're going to travel into the city for work, and they're going to go check out vehicles on lots while they're there. So this is a great feature that Google provides. You hear it called something called query parsing, if you want to use, a fancier name for it. But the reality is, it's just, to break it down, it's just people that are in your target or people that are interested in your target. So this can be a great thing, but it can be a challenge because occasionally you will have people that are far outside of your targeted area that are also, for some reason that you may not understand, I certainly don't, are actually searching for, car terms in Boston, as an example. So maybe they're going to travel, but, when I've looked at reports and for some of our clients and other advertising campaigns I've seen, oftentimes these can be people even as far away as completely different countries. So, I mean, it's possible that someone is going to travel to Boston to buy a car from Canada, I guess, but I find it unlikely that someone is going to travel from Germany all the way over to Boston to buy a car and then, I don't know, somehow ship it back. It seems unlikely. But these people can technically see your ads if they search with kind of Boston terms. And so I'll kind of show you kind of an example of this. So you can see here, we just have a very basic campaign here, right, targeting a radius around Boston. But if we look over on the right-hand side, you can actually see the areas where these kind of ads are shown. And you can see that Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the state, actually garnered us a lot of traffic and actually cost a lot of money for this person. So they showed ads in the country of Georgia, and those people in Georgia, Georgians, clicked on the ads. So I doubt that, all 803 people are going to travel, across the world to buy a car in Boston. Now, there is a way to prevent this from happening, and this is where I really want to focus on. You can actually exclude locations. So it's a lot of people, and this is kind of a common misconception, I believe. A lot of people think if you target just this area in Boston, that these are the only people that are going to see your ads and no one else is ever going to see your ads no matter what. If they're not within this circle, they're not going to see the ads. It's simple. But like I was saying earlier, Google provides the feature where maybe someone just outside of Boston, maybe they're in Portsmouth, just outside your circle, but they're searching for cars in Boston. Well, that's good. They might travel to Boston. The drawback is obviously people in Georgia, the country of Georgia, may see your ads and click on them, and you would spend money. So there are ways to prevent this, and that is by using location exclusions. So you can actually then exclude areas outside of your target, and that kind of prevents this from happening. So I would encourage all of you that are currently running campaigns, whether it's you're running them personally or you're running with an agency, however you're running them, I would encourage you to kind of get a report. You can do this within AdWords itself, or you can ask your agency to do it, to actually look at user locations within AdWords. They can actually tell you where the people are located who are seeing your ad and clicking on them. That's actually where I got this picture here of Georgia. We obviously aren't targeting Georgia, but that's where I figured out, oh, wow, there's people in Georgia that are actually clicking on this ad and spending our money. So why don't we exclude that? That prevents those people from seeing the ad in the future. So it's not enough to just, like I was saying earlier, just target a 20-mile radius around your dealership. That's not actually going to completely accomplish what you're looking for. You also then have to look over your traffic and keep up on it and actually start excluding areas for places where people are seeing your ad that they're not going to click.
Sam, if I can jump in here.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
This is basic optimization. But for many of the partners that we work with, or if you happen to be doing it in-house, a lot of times this can seem to be a little bit more advanced because you'll focus on keywords and excluding keywords that don't make sense. But if you're not also doing it when it comes to locations and other targeting parameters, you still have waste out there. And there could be a very valid reason. Maybe there's a family who lives in this country of Georgia who's trying to buy a car for their mom in Boston. You don't know what that is, but when you find that there's traffic that you believe to be not valuable, this is a really easy way to make sure that you focus your budget, which may be limited. For many of us, we don't have unlimited funds. So focus your budget on where you know it's most likely to get you the best results. This is a really easy way to do that.
Absolutely. And it's not just, obviously I'm presenting an extreme example. Odds are you're not going to see a ton of traffic from Georgia, but you may start to see traffic from areas that are much closer. And, as a dealer or an agency working with a dealer, whoever you may be, you're going to have the best information about where your customers are actually located. You can actually look at your sales, break them down by zip code, and really identify areas that are low value. So one of the easiest ways that you can actually make your advertising more effective is not just, you don't have to throw money at a problem or like, oh, we're just not spending enough. We need more traffic. We need more traffic. We need it cheaper. One of the most effective types of optimization, just as Candace was saying, was actually to start to exclude people that are low value to you. So if you know that an area is not going to travel, maybe there's a competitor there, maybe it's just very difficult to get from their area to your dealership, you can start to exclude those areas geographically and prevent them from seeing your ads. This allows you to take that same chunk of money and stretch it to go farther. So it's not about how much money you're spending. It's actually about how you're spending the money that you have. And this is one of my favorite ways to kind of optimize accounts, and it's one of the ways I think is, like Candace saying, that is often overlooked because people just focus on keywords. They focus on, the very nitty-gritty of that. They get very deep into it, with, like I was saying before, long-tail keywords and a lot of marketing speak. But the reality is very basic optimizations are kind of the low-hanging fruit. And so these are the things that you need to take care of first before you start worrying about, should I be adding, trim levels to my models with specific match types and all kinds of fancy stuff. If you're not covering the basics, then you're really kind of just siphoning off money into areas where you don't really need to be spending it. So the next factor I want to talk about is the messaging itself. So it's not enough to just reach your customers. It's not the most difficult thing in the world to set up an advertising campaign to reach customers. You can, like I was saying before, you can have that 20-mile radius. But even after you have your targeting set up, you actually need to entice them to go to your dealership instead of your competitors. So I know that all the dealerships that I've looked at have, varying levels of incentives and different programs and kind of why buy type things, we call them, things that really draw people into their dealership. But oftentimes it's very difficult to illustrate these facts when you're doing your advertising. If you have a tiny text ad, you have limited characters. If you have just those image ads, it's very difficult to kind of get that enticement out there. It's very difficult to talk about your charity work in the, in your local community. It's difficult to focus on, some of the benefits of your dealership. I know I've even heard of a dealership that had like a putting green. That kind of stuff's really cool, but it's very difficult to show that in an ad. So really what you got to focus on are things to entice people that you can kind of break down more individually to kind of speak to them directly, kind of in a short blurb. And one of the most effective ways that I've seen to do this is actually to just create customized incentives. So you can kind of target specific areas geographically and customize your incentives around that. So your goal is to kind of bring in customers from areas that are, a little bit weaker for you. So I've kind of put together kind of just here's an example of what I'm talking about. So what I've done here is I've just taken some sales and I've mapped them by zip code. You can do this in Excel. And it kind of created a 3D map. So these bar graphs represent, how many sales are in each specific zip code. So you can see if this was, my kind of PMA area, then obviously there's this one bar that's much lower. I have much smaller bar graph there in that kind of top left. That's fewer sales. So that's one specific zip code where, for whatever reason, we were having a challenge bringing in customers compared to the surrounding area. So obviously, if there's some special reason for this, but if you can't think of any unique reason, like they can't get to your dealership easily or construction or something, I don't know, then what you really can do when you start to create these customized campaigns is you can start to create incentives targeted to just that area. So you can see how this would work hand in hand with the targeting we were just talking about. Because if you don't have very specific targeting, you can't focus on that area. Once you have that specific targeting, you can now focus down and start to tailor your messaging to those customers. So instead of just having the same ad show to everyone, you can have an ad specifically targeted to that area. So if I go back to this example, this is just a picture of Ann Arbor, Michigan with some fake numbers on there that I created, but you can see there this would be kind of the west side of Ann Arbor. So I could actually start targeting my messaging around that. I could create a campaign that is limited to just that zip code, and I could start to really tailor incentives. Maybe I say, hey, if you're coming from the west side of Ann Arbor, get an extra $100 off on the sale of your car, or you get free oil changes for 2 months, or anything like this. You can start to tailor these incentives. Something short and sweet that you can throw in an ad speaks volumes to these people, because when they see that they're not just like everybody else, that they're actually being focused on. By limiting the targeting, you can set these incentives up. In addition, because you know your area and you're kind of moving away from these cookie cutter campaigns, because your marketing is awesome after this webinar, you can actually start to add kind of unique geographic-based keywords to your campaigns. So you know your area. So if there's a local landmark that maybe you want to throw in your keywords, with your car terms, if there's, some sort of specific, maybe local name for an area that, someone nationally wouldn't know. These types of, ideas and information and kind of tailored campaigns, this really speaks to people, because it means that, when I'm on Google, I'm not just seeing a bunch of, generic cookie cutter ads, but I'm starting to see ads that are specifically focused on me as an individual, and that makes it much more likely for me to connect with that dealership. Because what you're trying to build is not just a sale, but you're trying to build your brand and you're trying to build a relationship. And relationships are, kind of the hallmark of any relationship is communication. So by focusing your messaging, you're focusing your communication to talk to these people specifically. So you can, like I was saying, you can use your familiarity, the location specifics, all those types of things, and speak to your audience directly. So I'll give you an example. So once you have that incentive set up, you can start to create customized messaging. So here's just an example. You could have like a location. Let's say it was like Ann Arbor. So you could have like, I just always say Ann Arbor because that's where I am. You could say Ann Arbor residents, test drive with us, right? And then you could have, a picture from the local area. So I can see that it's not just, some person that's sitting behind a computer in, some other city, not Ann Arbor, but I can see that, wow, this is an image that's actually means something to Ann Arborites, right? And I could have the car on the left-hand side there. This is an example. This is going to drive much higher click-through rates. It's going to drive much more engagement with your dealership specifically. When you're talking about kind of higher level things like tier 1 brands, advertising, just general Ford and Mazda and Nissan, these people are covering kind of the overall branding. But where you can really drive your messaging is by focusing down and talking, on a more individualized basis with your customers. So you can really build that relationship. And customized ad copy is something that kind of allows you to do that. So, when you kind of combine this customized ad copy with those customized locations, this is where you really start to see the benefits of really focusing on the big 3 kind of connections there. We don't want to just have these 20-mile radius campaigns because then you can't do things like this. This is why you have those specialized campaigns where you're focusing on individual areas, because it allows you, it kind of opens up the door for you to build these relationships with your customers by creating this specialized ad copy. So now you have the ability to show them these incentives. And maybe you create one of these for many areas, right? You don't have to just focus on a weaker area. Maybe you use this to drive up, the strong area as well. Maybe you have an area where it's difficult for someone to get to your dealership. So maybe you focus on that. You say, something about how long it actually takes to get there. Maybe you have an area where it seems like it's really far away, but in reality it only takes 10-minute drive. So you just say, hey, we're only 10 minutes away. These types of very kind of unique local ad copy, this is what creates those kind of talking points with your customers in this relationship. And we're going to focus in on a second on more kind of millennial type information, but we've all seen kind of the birth of kind of this buy local kind of movement and these moving away from national brands and moving into more localized specific relationships with local businesses. So this is where you create your relationship and your kind of hallmark as a local business in your area. This is where you illustrate the people that live near you that you are also a local business, that you employ local people, that you are just like they are, and you are trying to service your area. This is where you get people to come to your website that they can see the great things you're doing in your community. And you're doing that by making kind of good ad copy here and kind of a touch point to create that relationship. So once you have that relationship, once you've kind of created that, then you're going to kind of move into the kind of our final section here where we're going to focus a little bit more on the medium. So this is kind of the third point. So here we're going to kind of talk about how it is that they're going to get in contact with you. So now you've created this kind of custom geographic targeting, and that has allowed you, that has opened up the door for you to create these customized incentives. So you've got these really streamlined campaigns now. You're rolling really well. Okay, you've got this local messaging, you've got a good incentive, you're enticing your customers. So kind of the final step out of these basics is how are they going to get in contact with you? Cool, I'm a customer, I see your ad, that's awesome. How do I engage with your brand? What do I do? Do I just click on your ad and I go to your website? Okay, now I'm on your website, now what am I going to do? I'm going to poke around, right? You want to make sure that your customers are actually able to reach you, and you want to make sure they don't have to jump through hoops to do it. So different types of customers are familiar and comfortable with different contact mediums. And this is where we're going to start to talk about this kind of generational shift. So, you know, Candace and I were discussing that we were both millennials. So just to give you some background, when I bought a car years ago, it was my first car and I was all excited. So what did I do? So did I call local dealerships and kind of, you know, look around? No, I didn't make a single phone call actually. Did I go to different dealerships and test drive? Nope. Didn't make a single trip to a dealership before I bought the car. I instead researched online for weeks and weeks, looked around because I figured out what type of vehicle I was looking for that was in my price range. I was buying it used because I was a poor, just graduated college student, like many millennials. So I was looking for a used car, but I wanted something nice. So I did a lot of research. I poked around. Then once I decided, okay, this is the make and model I want, then it kind of shifted into kind of more local search. So then I started, you know, searching across Google for all the local dealerships that might have that vehicle in stock. So this is where this generational shift that Candace is going to talk about in a second really comes into play, because I know that my parents, for example, who are actually baby boomers, and Gen X's as well, they're more likely to make a phone call. They're more likely to call the dealership. Whenever, you know, I'm talking to my parents, you know, they're, oh, why don't you just call somebody? Why don't you just call somebody? Right? Just call them. Where the only person I make phone calls to is my mom. I don't call anybody. I don't call any of my friends. I don't call businesses. I don't call anybody. I didn't call any dealerships. So if the dealership was not making it easy for me to reach them, right, to look at their inventory online, to find them, then they were out. They were just, I wasn't even going to know about them to consider them. It didn't matter how great their price was because I didn't care about it. I was not going to call them. And I was also, this is a key point I think people miss, I was also not going to fill out a lead form online. So I know this seems counterintuitive because you would think like, well, you know, millennials are going to be online, you know, using the Googles. But the reality is, you know, I'm thinking, you know what, if I fill out one of these forms, I'm just going to get spammed with email for the rest of my life. I don't want that. So I'm not going to do that either. So there's another kind of contact medium that most people are missing, and this is something that Google has actually addressed relatively recently. And so it's something we really need to think about as kind of the generation kind of shifts as you're, you know, I think it was in 2016 I read today that the millennial generation just kind of took over as kind of the biggest, I don't know if it's the biggest generation or just the biggest buying power, but regardless, you know, this is where you start to get into something new, which is called a messaging extension, which actually allows your customers to text you directly instead of calling or filling out a lead form. So this was not around when I was looking for my vehicle, but if it was, I definitely would have used it because it's the perfect medium for me because I don't want to talk on the phone and I fear people having my email address forever. So a text to me is not a big deal. I'll text anyone about anything. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's just the most common form of communication that I have. And so as millennials are much more likely to research things online, they're also much more likely to text you. And if you do not have the medium that they are looking for to contact you, like text messaging set up, then you're just losing out on this customer. And as more and more of your customer base shifts into millennials, you're losing out on more and more customers, and it's obviously going to affect your sales. So Candace actually has some awesome kind of data about this that I'll let her kind of get into right now.
Thanks, Sam. So the biggest mistake that marketers make is thinking about their advertising in terms of how they would want to interact with their brand, which is always going to be very different than what your consumers are doing, and speaking your own language and essentially putting your advertising where you want your customers to be as opposed to where they are and where they're spending their time. That is one of the biggest mistakes that anyone in the advertising industry makes. One of the ways that you can get ahead of all of this is to think about your customer. Who exactly are you talking to? In this particular case, this group, which it's debatable, but it could be anywhere from 19 or 20 up to 34, 35 years old. These are people with disposable income. Think about those double income households with young couples with no children. Think about new parents who, if they've never owned a car in their life, now they need one. All of those life decisions happen within that group. So this is a target that you need to really understand, and it's a target whose language you have to speak. So think about this statistic that we're showing here. There's a key distinction for this group, and it's that we are very indecisive. But all car buyers are indecisive if research serves. What we're seeing here is that millennials actually take more test drives than non-millennials. Part of that is because, yes, I don't know exactly what I want. Let me check it out. Now, the truth of the industry is no one is visiting dealerships or taking test drives as much as they used to. The statistic that I see all the time is in 2005, the average was to visit 5 dealerships before you make a decision. And in 2015 or 16, the average is 1.5. So not even 2 dealerships that people visit. But this over-indexes a little bit for millennials because of this indecisiveness. And that's something that you can take advantage of, especially using the new media that we have available. So there's a few ways that you can actually connect with a brand. And Sam, jump down to the next one. Millennials are on the go. Everyone's on the go. Everyone is consuming all of their media using their mobile devices. But think about who this mobile consumer is and the channel that's most convenient for them in the moment. So there's a bunch of different ways that someone looking for information or product or a service can connect with you. And Google has a bunch of ad products that actually help with that. You can drive customers to your site, your app. You can prompt them to call you. You can prompt them to visit you. Those things are Google's bread and butter in terms of digital advertising. But what about messaging? That's not something that people have effectively been able to address until now. So if we jump down to the next one, let's dig into why this medium is so important right now, especially for this group. People open text messages immediately. Our research tells us that text messages are open on average within 3 minutes. Now that's pretty crazy if you're sitting at work and you're not really supposed to be on your phone, but that's the average. There are people who open their text messages within seconds. There are people who take a few more minutes, but the average is 3 minutes. And on top of that, people do their best never to miss a text message. Think about what your email campaign open rate is. I'll bet it's pretty low compared to a 90% overall open rate for text messages. Specific to millennials, this group actually prefers conversation, just not on the phone, which is what we're used to in traditional advertising. That may be the way that you prefer to communicate, but remember, biggest mistake you can make is to speak your language instead of your consumers. So instead, have a conversation with your consumers via two-way texting. It's fast, it's convenient, it's easy, and let's face it, you can still do 5 other things while you're waiting for the next text message to come, and that is just the way that we live now. Everything has to be immediate, and we're constantly multitasking. We're looking at our phones and at our computers and at our TVs, and it's just easier for those of us who live on the go and use our mobile devices for everything to be able to have a conversation via text. Now, for those of you who don't take text seriously as an advertising medium, think about this. On average, this is looking at a whole group of people, 65% of consumers say text is really an acceptable form of business communication, not just to speak to you, but also to take action. The survey specifically asked about getting information about a product or service, scheduling an in-person appointment, et cetera, et cetera. So 65% of your possible customers say they are more than happy to do that via text. And if you're not taking advantage of that and tailoring your messaging to that, you could be potentially missing out on a huge segment of your marketing potential. So moving on to actually take a look at how you might use this. It's just an extension. We've created a way for you to speak to your consumers the same way you can add a call extension and have that little call button. You can now add a message extension where it has the text that you want it to have. In this example, it's got questions, send us a text. In the same way a person clicks that call button and it opens up their dialer, Person clicks the text message button and it opens up whatever SMS application they happen to be using. And it pre-fills with whatever your response is to that particular messaging that you showed in the extension. What you say there is up to you. It can be conversational. It can be asking them a question. It could even be giving them sort of a pop-up that allows them to choose, do I want to talk to a salesperson or a service center? You have the option to customize all of that, and it's really timely. The caveat to this is you have to respond to it in the way that consumers are used to using text messaging. You can't treat this like an email where you let it sit and then you respond to them when you get to it. When someone's texting, they expect it to be immediate, so you have to have a very timely response, and that helps with user engagement. So moving right along, we've done quite a few case studies with this product, which is brand new. Not everyone has access to it or has effectively used it yet. So it's something that you could take advantage of and be ahead of the rest of your market. But we've asked for feedback about this, and these are some of the quotes that we're getting. A director of search marketing said that the conversion rate on their message extensions was 41% higher compared to other ad extensions. So when you put that together with their customer support software, really well-trained agents, that allow their agents to respond to requests in a really efficient and cost-effective way. And this is not a particular client who says this. This is someone who is a marketing professional who had this feedback about using text messaging for digital advertising. I think we have one more case study. Yep, so another paid search manager, and this one's auto-specific. He said, the results from click to message, which is what we're calling these message extensions, have been phenomenal. We've seen an 80% higher conversion rate compared to similar channels. Can now tap into an important consumer base that prefers to use SMS, that's those millennials we've been talking about, to learn more about insurance products. Besides giving users a new way to get in touch with us, we feel this by far the fastest and most cost-effective way to connect with them. So they recognized very early on in testing this product that speaking to their consumers had multiple benefits. They were able to reach those who are not filling out lead forms, like Sam or like myself, because I don't want to get emails from you every day for the rest of my life. Or they don't want to call because they don't want to be sold, or they don't want to be badgered about something that they're not really interested in. They prefer to speak to you over SMS, and perhaps you would not have been able to communicate with them otherwise. But you're able to reach that group who you wouldn't have been able to communicate with otherwise, and you can also reach the group that, yes, they may have called you once they figured out what they wanted. Yes, they may have filled out that lead form, but being able to communicate with them using their preferred medium is more incentive for them to actually speak to you and engage more on what you want to convince them of. So this is something that we've been testing quite a bit. I've worked with C4 Analytics extensively, testing this on multiple accounts and clients that they work with, from really big auto groups all the way down to small single store dealers. And we've seen really, really great results. So it's something that I would say, if you put it together with the other methods that Sam is talking about today, can be really successful for your business as well. Back to you, Sam.
Thanks, Candace. And I just want to focus back on something that Candace just said. So, particularly eye-opening when you think about, how people used to go to 5 different dealerships for test drives, and now you're talking about 1.5 on average. Obviously, people don't go to half a dealership, but this is kind of amazing to think about. If you're not giving your customers the ability to talk to you in the medium that they are looking for, and if they're forced to jump through hoops or to make a phone call they don't want to, or make a trip they don't want to make, you're just out of the equation. You basically are having a much more difficult time really speaking to people, because people are obviously doing a lot more research online. So that is something that people are doing passively. So they're engaging with you and your advertising team, right? They're engaging with your ads, but they're not engaging with your sales team. And so obviously, dealerships, their sales team makes and breaks them, right? Like, that's the people that actually get the job done of selling cars, which is obviously the goal of why we're doing this, right? It's to sell vehicles. And so if you're not even getting the opportunity to show how amazing your sales team is because they don't even show up at your dealership, well, that's really going to hurt you. And as the generational shift kind of accelerates, as moving forward, then what you're really going to start to see is you're going to really start to see dealers differentiate themselves. So the dealerships that are most able to quickly, and with agility adapt to the changing marketing demographics of their customers, those are the dealerships that are going to succeed. Because no matter how great your sales team is, no matter how awesome you are at converting someone who walks in the door into someone who drives away from your dealership, none of that matters if they don't even show up. And if you're not presenting them the mediums like click-to-message extensions that Google is showing here, if you're not presenting them with the mediums that they use to communicate, and you're not speaking to them kind of in the language that they understand, then all that work you've done for your sales team, all the work that you would have done had they shown up to your dealership is for nothing, because you're not the 1.5 dealership that they're test driving at. You're one of the 4 that they used to test drive at that now they just don't even show up to. So obviously very powerful stuff. So I kind of want to put it together now. So I kind of want to review kind of what we've kind of gone over here. So let's kind of get back to kind of the basics. I'll kind of give you kind of a test study. So here we are. So here's our target customer area. So we already know where our sales are happening. We've mapped them out. We said, okay, here's where our problem area is, right? This is where we need to sell more vehicles. This is where our customers are, and for whatever reason, we are not reaching them. So what do we need to do? So first thing, we can do is the details of the area, the people that, live in the area, types of consumers that seem to come from there. Maybe you can talk to the people as you sell vehicles to them that are from that area and just, give them kind of a passive survey for the customers that you do have. Why did you decide to come here? What are you doing? So you kind of gain that business intelligence, right? You're trying to gain that kind of information and I would say localized knowledge about that area. That's going to allow you to identify kind of some sort of target incentive or messaging that really speaks to them. So it doesn't have to be, my examples, I'm going with the easy, right? Just like, $300 off oil changes, right? Something that's, simple to kind of understand for an example. But you don't have to use money as an incentive, right? It's not about just giving away money or gifts. I mean, that's obviously a very powerful way to get people to do things, but it's not the only way. So you can also just tailor your messaging itself with no change in incentives, just by adapting your messaging to their area and speaking a little bit more specifically to those people. You can increase those click-through rates. You can really start to drive more of those people to click on your ads and start to engage with your brand. You can really start to create that relationship. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be oil changes. I mean, a lot of you, depending on what brand of vehicle you sell, you might be restricted on the types of incentives you can have. Might have a lot of, advertising covenants and things that are very specific about what you can and cannot say. That does not change the fact that you can use this same idea, right? Because the goal of this is to just cut through the BS, right? That's what I said at the start. And I'm trying to cut through all the fancy marketing speak and all the requirements and all the, you got to do this geofencing. Just skip all that crap. It doesn't, that's all fancy. That's all good and fine. But let's get down to the nitty gritty, which is just, you need to find people who are going to buy your vehicles, and you need to speak to those people, right? You need to create relationships for those people. Once you have that relationship set up, once they know your brand, then you say, okay, I've got the idea. I know what I'm going to do. Then you need to customize your location targeting. You need to target that area. But in addition, you can't just set it up and leave it, right? Then you need to start fine-tuning it. So as Candace pointed out, this is a kind of a basic optimization that a lot of people miss, right? So you need to start excluding areas where, there might be low volume traffic, like my example of the country of Georgia. But in addition, you also need to exclude areas where your messaging would be counterproductive. So if I write a really cool ad that's really speaking to people, this kind of, where's my map here? This kind of low sales issue. If I write a really fancy message and I'm just speaking just to those people, then I don't want to alienate my other. I don't want them to think, hey, why do they get a sweet incentive? What do I get? Right? I don't want to hurt sales in other areas. So that is why you have to then create very targeted campaigns, both with targeting and with exclusions, because you want to make sure that just the people that message applies to, that those are the only people that see the advertising. Those are the people that see the messaging. So that way you're not being counterproductive. You want to make sure that you're highlighting your dealership for those people and not hurting it with others. So this is where you start to fine tune it. You kind of put it together at the start, right? There's that geographic targeting, right? We've got the incentive. We're good on that. Okay, we've set that up. We know our target area. Now I'm targeting that area. Now I've got this very specific targeting, and now I've kind of excluded other areas where we get kind of low volume traffic or just low value traffic, right? And then, right, this is the final section. This is the medium. So then I'm going to create contact opportunities, right? So now I'm going to set up those click-to-message extensions to make sure that people can reach me. I'm not going to neglect my other extensions and my other information, right? I'm still going to have a call extension. Not everybody is a millennial. We're not just leaving everybody else out in the cold. That's not the idea at all. We want to be inclusive. So I'm going to set up the click-to-message extension. I'm going to set up my call extension. I'm going to make sure that, my website is optimized. I'm basically going to make it as easy as possible for these people to reach me, because I want to make sure at every step of the way I'm actually addressing these people. So I have my target set, I have my incentive set, and now I have my medium set. So we've kind of broken it down, right? We've got the very specific, target, we've got the very specific incentive, and now we've got the very specific medium. So we've created this highly targeted campaign. We've stepped away from the cookie cutter campaigns. We've stepped away from these radius kind of general things, right? And we've kind of allowed ourselves and kind of opened up the ability to reach these people directly. So the takeaway that I really want to kind of leave you with is, when you're combining all these things, and when you're not only combining geo-targeting and medium and messaging, but even aside from all that, when you're listening to other products, agencies, marketing teams, whatever, when you're listening to kind of all the marketing information they're giving you, all the cool products, the programmatic information, even when you're learning more about millennials, big topic right now, right? The big shift to millennials. As you're learning all these things, the very basics never change. So it's going to always be about targeting your message and then the medium where they reach you. Those are always the most important kind of details. Everything else is just window dressing. That is the hallmark of success, and that is really what you need to be focusing on. So, when you're creating like a geofence campaign as an example, which is an advanced, kind of marketing speak thing, that's awesome. But you still need to be focusing on where are you targeting. You need to be focusing on what your message is to that area, how you speak to those people, and you need to make sure that those people can contact you. When you're doing long tail keywords and fancy keyword optimization, still, same three things. Where are you targeting? How are you talking to people? How do they get in contact with you? It doesn't matter what it is. Programmatic display, same thing. It doesn't really make any difference, any medium. You can even think of this on not just online, right? Even if you're talking about, going back to just newspaper advertising, which is kind of where I started working on things, right? So what are you doing? It's where are you locating your ad? What are you telling people? How to get in contact with you? So online has opened up this huge ability to really be specific on targets. It allows you to really focus in on areas. It allows you to kind of exclude other areas. It allows you to tailor messaging to very specific consumers. And then it allows you to have these really fancy new mediums like click-to-message that Google has provided. But you need to be focusing on these things. And if you're not, if you're, whoever you're working with isn't, if your marketing team can't handle this, if they're not able to set up these custom campaigns, then you need to find someone who is able to do that. right? Because if you don't have control over these things, then you don't have control over your advertising. And when you have people only test driving at one dealership, then control over your advertising is by far the most important thing that you have, because that's control over your relationship with your customers. And when you want to convert a customer from someone who just, buys a car once and that's it and you never hear from them again, and you want to convert them into people who come in for service and people who buy their next car there, and then as they get married, they bring, their spouse to your dealership to buy a car, and they have kids, they need to upgrade to something safer, then all these things are about the relationship that you have. And if you're not controlling your advertising, if you're not controlling that brand, then you can't create that relationship. And, if you're using some sort of just cookie cutter campaign setup with targets set up by someone who has no idea about your local area, with messaging that has nothing to do with, what it is that you do and who it is that you are, then you're going to lose out on customers. You're going to be one of the 4 dealerships that people no longer test drive at, and those dealerships are not going to be around much longer. So this is why, you got to kind of focus on the basics and, take it away from there. So as a final thing, just to reinforce, and I know I'm reinforcing this a lot, but I really want people to kind of remember this 2 weeks from now when you're getting all these pitches, is, don't let complicated language or overwhelming data throw you off your game. Okay, you should always be able to drill down to these 3 main concepts. So no matter who it is you are talking to, no matter what kind of fancy acronyms they're using to try to confuse you, you just be able to say, you know what, I'm going to just pause the pitch and just say, look, what are we targeting? Who are we targeting? How are they going to reach us? If you break down all your advertising campaigns in that basic manner, you'll have a handle on what it is you're trying to do, and you'll be able to run much more effective advertising campaigns, and you'll be able to get many more customers to your dealership. So that's kind of all that we have for today. We're finishing up just a little early. But yeah, I'd like to thank you all for attending the webinar. Really appreciate it. Candace, do you have any final words?
Sure. I 100% agree with all of your takeaways. I just want to reiterate, speaking your client's language, what you've talked about with the messaging section, and this whole idea of it's not about bringing your customers to your dealership anymore. Now it's about bringing your dealership to them. And that means that you have to adapt. You have to adapt your targeting. You have to adapt your messaging. You have to adapt the media that you're using to communicate in order to do that, because that's just the way that consumers make purchase decisions now. That's my final 2 cents. Thank you for having me, Sam. It's always a pleasure to work with you and work with C4 Analytics. And I think that's it for today.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar, and thank you to Candace and Sam and C4 Analytics and Google for some great content as always. To view this webinar on demand and feature digital dealer webinars, please visit digitaldealer.com/webinars. Thank you and have a great day.